What have you been doing? Tell us about what you've been doing in your career or school since graduation from the Lockheed Martin Leadership Institute.
Okay, so since I graduated last year, I went to work at Eli Lilly and Company, which is a pharmaceutical company in Indianapolis, Indiana. And I'm working as an information and digital solutions analyst, which is just a fancy way of saying that I'm a software developer. Um, I've been primarily doing that. I've done a little bit of user-centered design, research and design on the side. So I basically got to use both of my majors because I was computer science and interactive media studies. So for my day job, I'm doing primarily programming. Outside of that, I'm doing a few other initiatives. One of them is a program where I'm trying to help people in my area of the company learn about our area and kind of connect with each other. So it's one part a learning organization and one part a social organization. And we're starting it from scratch. We're not really official yet. So that's kind of been fun. It's all new hire led. So that's where my leadership skills are being used, if you will.
So what do you think some of the biggest obstacles when you were going from college to work have been?
I'd say the biggest obstacle I came up with right away, or ran into right away, was suddenly going from basically being on top of the world to something completely different. Because usually when you go from like senior in high school to freshman in college, going from top of the world in high school to the bottom of the world in college. But it's not quite the same thing going from college to career. Because people still want to hear my opinion. They still want to know what I can provide, but I'm also not the expert in the room. So in that way, it's kind of similar like going high school to college, but the big change is there isn't this dynamic of there's a professor in the room who knows what they're talking about or a teacher going back to high school. Everyone's kind of on a more level playing field where the people who've been there forever want to hear your fresh experiences because they've been doing it the same way forever, so they can't see the other ways of doing it. But at the same time, you don't have all the experience you need to be able to make really informed decisions because in my case, I don't know the industry. This is my first time being in it. So it's a very different dynamic of how you interact with I don't know why I'm saying you, but it's a different way that I interact with my peers and with my boss. So my boss is not the same as professor in college. I go to her for advice all the time, but she's not there to tell me what to do. I'm in charge of figuring out what I need to do and where I need to do it. But she's there to support me and make sure what I'm doing aligns with our overall objectives. And really going into that, I had no idea how to really operate under that team-based structure where it's not just me and someone telling me what to do. We do a really good job of exploring that in the Leadership Institute, but in terms of like my day-to-day work, I wasn't used to thinking about it in that way. So it was a change in mindset.
Was there anything that really, helped you change in this transition? Or?
I think the biggest thing that was a help for me, especially with that last change I was just talking about, was being open to asking questions, not being afraid to ask questions, and being receptive to the feedback you get when you ask questions. So an example of that in the project I started out with, I walked in my first day and they gave me an overview of what the system we were working on was and how things were related to each other. And I did not understand it at all. So over the course of the next several weeks, I kept asking questions when I didn't know what something was, and was willing to be the person who didn't know what was going on in the room and was open to learning something. A lot of times I would ask what I assumed was going on. I'd present what my thought was and leave it out to them to say, no, that's not right, or yes, that is. And that happened in both cases, where sometimes I was completely wrong. And when that happens, you have to take that as a learning opportunity. That's one of the hard parts, is swallowing your pride and actually being able to embrace that something's different from how you think it is. There was actually a really good example of that I went through on my first project. About 3 months into the project, 2 more senior developers were added to the project because we were behind on our timeline, which happens a lot. So when the 2 senior developers joined on the project, they looked at my code and more or less said, we will try to use this, but we're probably not going to be able to. So we actually ended up having to completely rewrite the code I spent the last 3 months writing in, let's see, how was it, a month. So that was fun. But that first day when they basically said that, I was completely devastated, because here was all this hard work I'd been putting in. And I came to find out that we weren't going to be able to use it. So those first couple weeks, I'm not perfect, so I kind of was very resentful and kind of a little bit angry. But as time went on, I had to swallow my pride, because I wasn't able to do anything if I was going to keep harping on we should use the code that isn't working. So what I ended up doing was sitting down with one of the senior developers and really understanding why my code wasn't going to work, and better understand the code that he was making for the project. And what ended up happening is I gained a much better understanding of the language we were using. In this case, it's called TypeScript. I had never used TypeScript before. It's a form of JavaScript for any of the technical people who are curious. But with the way we were using the system, what I ended up doing was kind of what I learned to do in school, which was make the system as close to the data as possible. But the system we were making is eventually going to go up into the cloud. So we can't tie it to our database, because the database underneath it's going to change. So it was just a completely different way of thinking about how the data and the code were connected that I'd never experienced before, because I hadn't come across that in school, and I hadn't come across that in any of my internships. So instead of, and I will admit again, I did this for like a week or 2 where I just kind of grumpily stood my ground. But once I got over that part, once I was embracing the change and like being willing to learn, we were able to move forward with the project. And we successfully hit our new launch date, which was a huge scramble. But we were able to reach it, and I was able to better understand what was going on. And now I'm actually considered the subject matter expert on that system, because I'm the person who understands it the best, just because I had to really learn what was going on.
That kind of ties into the next question. What kind of unexpected changes have you been exposed to since you graduated, and what strategies did you employ to embrace the change?
I think that was a good example.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let's see. So another big, I touched on this a little bit. Another big change that I came across was when you're working in work, you're not necessarily going to get a project handed to you like an assignment. So my first project, that was the case. They had this completely lined up for me, and I was ready to start my first day. A lot of my friends, that wasn't the case. And I later, once I finished that first project, got to experience more what their situation was like. Because basically after the first project was done, there was just this blank space in between projects where I had to figure out what my next project was. But I couldn't just ask what my next project was, because my next project was tied up in a bunch of different projects. So it was less what's Michael's next project and more what part of this project is Michael going to work on. And a lot of that was dependent on other factors that I had no control over. So adjusting to that level of, there isn't a guarantee what you don't know what your next, there's no syllabus, you don't know what your next assignment's going to be tomorrow. The first thing I had to do was kind of get comfortable with that uncomfortable feeling of not knowing what I'm doing in a day. And after that, I had to find something to fill the day with. while I was waiting. So there's several different ways to go about doing that. But to try to get my focus, what I ended up doing is I had a discussion with my manager about not really being sure where I could be useful at the moment, and kind of asking what I can do. And she gave me several things to from a training perspective that I could work on, from a networking perspective. Lilly is a big networking company. It's all about making connections with people so that when something comes up where your skills are needed, you know who you can reach out to. So that's one of the nice things about that uncertainty, is that there was still stuff that I could do, and it's being willing to, basically, I think the way I coped with that change in not having a direct goal was to be willing to have those conversations, and to better understand where I fit. In addition to talking with my manager, I also talked with our architect, who's in charge of determining what systems we're using across our portfolio of projects, and worked with her to kind of understand this bigger overarching project that I was going to be playing some part in once an opening opened up, so I could start to learn what I would be doing. Now, there's a temptation to kind of sit idly and wait to be told what to do. But most of the time, no one's going to tell you, okay, you can start this now. You kind of have to keep having that conversation and keeping it open to understand where you can fit in, if that makes any sense.
Thank you. What was helpful in your work that you've learned from the Leadership Institute?
So I think the first thing that comes to mind is, and I think I've kind of mentioned it, it's not a name, it's the growth mindset. Being willing to see that you're not stuck in one place, that you can continue to grow. That's kind of the well I draw from when I'm trying to ask those kind of questions to understand what's going on, is to know that I'm at a place where I'm not going to know everything, and I need to go and find out more. The other big thing is kind of, I didn't really realize this till afterwards, but one of the things the Leadership Institute kind of almost subconsciously teaches you how to do is to see an idea and figure out its potential, which I think that's part of the strategic part. So, but I think, I only say that because I know you're still a junior, but I think some of the strategic stuff we do really helps to broaden that ability to see something. But that really, the example I'm thinking of is kind of with the junior project. It kind of starts off as this very vague thing where you're just, at least the way Professor Mormon did it with us, is she literally just asked us, okay, what kind of, more or less, what do you want to do? And we kind of brainstormed from there. And it really started as this very nebulous, we're going to do something that's going to impact outside of Oxford. And it grew from there. For us, it became, one of the ideas that came up in our brainstorming was, what if we made a curriculum to teach people about coaching? That wasn't what we ended up doing in the long run, but that kind of started this idea of what is coaching. And that's where we started learning about it. And that eventually became the summit that we did on coaching. And so it started from nothing and became something through hard work and dedication, and honestly, leadership. So what the Leadership Institute equipped me with is now I see that pattern. I can see where some of that potential is. I'm not perfect at it. It's still something I'm learning how to do, but it gave me the tools and the knowledge that allows me to kind of see where I can be a leader and see where I can bring a change or a transformation that is meaningful to people. It gave me the vocabulary and kind of the mental fortitude to think about it in that way, rather than just kind of drifting through and dealing with problems as they come up. And this again is a strategic piece. It gives you an ability to look ahead and see what is a potential problem and kind of do something to address it before it happens. And again, I can't do that perfectly every time, but it really gave me the foundation to be able to do that.
Thank you. I think